I'm going to welcome everyone here today to this breakout session. It's called Playful Coding in K2 for Developmental Appropriate Ways to Introduce Computer Science in Early Elementary. And the presenter is Dr. Amanda Strawhacker. She is from Tufts University. My name is Kevin Neff. I'm the Data and Technology Integrationist from the Rockford Area Schools, and I'll be your host for this session. If you have questions for Dr. Strawhacker, please put comments into the chat box, and if you can, make sure that it is set to everyone so that all people can see your chats and your questions. Please include your name and your organization when doing the chat. And as a reminder, the session is being recorded and it will be available to be viewed and you can play and rewind it at your own speed later today. Dr. Strawhacker, we're ready for you to start your session.
Okay, thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you to everyone viewing either synchronously or asynchronously on the recording. Really excited to have you here to learn today about, go ahead and share my screen, playful coding in kindergarten to second grade, developmentally appropriate ways to integrate computer science in early childhood. So we're gonna go ahead and get started today. I have an agenda here for us. So it's a little abbreviated today. We're gonna briefly talk about, introduce myself and my research and where I come from, and then spend a little time on some learning frameworks. So these are gonna be some helpful guidelines when you're thinking about introducing coding to this age range and ways that you can organize your lesson content to really get the most out of your students' learning experience. Then we're going to spend a little time looking at Scratch Junior. I'll do a brief demo of my screen and we can actually walk through some of the key features, and we'll have a little activity there with Kevin's daughter's favorite story. And then after that, we'll move on to some tips and tricks and resources for thinking about K-2 coding in the computer science learning domain. So we'll go ahead and get started. So Kevin already introduced me, thank you so much, but very, very briefly, my name is newly Dr. Amanda Strawhacker. I'm the Associate Director and a lecturer at the Early Childhood Technology Graduate Certificate Program at Tufts University. So it's an online graduate program that you'll be hearing a little more about at the end of the program for educators and anyone who's interested in bringing coding into early childhood. I'm also a researcher with the DevTech research group, which we'll also talk about briefly. And my personal background and expertise, I'm really passionate about, I love animals, I love nature, I love science, and I love how humans have created new tools that are not natural at all that engage with those worlds. So I have a lot of experience bringing biology and coding, engineering, and life science education into early childhood. I've worked on a couple robotic kits, one of the apps of which we'll talk about today, and I'm very excited to always learn from and with educators on these subjects. So I said that I'm a researcher at the DevTech research group. This is a research lab at Tufts University. We're housed in the Child Study and Human Development Department. So we are not based in library science, we're not based in engineering. We really are committed to thinking first and foremost about the child as a user of human created tools and developing ways that those tools can be designed even more appropriately for young children to engage in the kind of holistic learning that we know they need to engage in to become well-rounded citizens. And we'll talk more about what kind of learning I mean when I say positive development. But this group is directed by Professor Marina Umashi-Bears, who is also the chair of that department at Tufts. So if you have any questions about her, she's written a number of books actually, and a number of research articles that we root all of our work in at DevTech. Be happy to talk more about that. And then very briefly, I also wanted to talk about the ECT program, that's that Early Childhood Technology program. So it's a one-year online blended in-person graduate certificate program. We're actually completing that course right now for this year's cohort. So if you like what we talk about today, I highly encourage you to check out the ECT program. You'll spend a year working at a self-paced way, and it's designed to work with your busy schedule, learning online about ways to integrate coding, robotics, engineering into K-2 learning spaces. I'd be happy to talk more about that at the end. But for now, I want to dive right in. And the first thing that we always like to think about at DevTech is physical and digital spaces. So for the first little activity here, I'm gonna go ahead and ask maybe Kevin can read off some of his ideas here of what kind of learning happens in the early childhood space that we see on the left side of the screen. So that would be in a playpen, for those of you who are familiar, or if you're not, an enclosed space where you can leave a child alone for a while. So what do we think the kind of learning is that happens in this?
And we do have several people on now, so if they would like to either enter that into the chat area or they can unmute to share, we can handle both ways.
Great.
We have one person who's saying it's a controlled environment, and I imagine she's talking about the playpen part.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so playpens are controlled in the sense that, for example, the child cannot get out of it. The adult is kind of in control, right, of who is in the space and what tools are in there. So it's controlled. What kind of learning happens in a controlled environment like that? What do children do?
I haven't seen anything in the chat window. I will probably pop out. There's probably just a lot of watching. We have someone who's now saying it's teacher directed. The students are going to follow along and they're going to do what is told.
Yep, there's a lot of, if you compare it to a classroom setting, a little bit more teacher directed, what kids are spending their time doing is whatever the adult chose for them, right? There's probably not going to be as much physical play, not as much moving around. It's a little bit contained, but maybe there are some fine motor activities they can engage in. Maybe there's some, you know, cognitive tasks like sorting or color matching. I'm seeing a few chat window pop-ups, so let me just quickly, yep, students follow along and do as told, no choice, no voice. So I don't want to argue that playpens are negative spaces for learning, because of course they do have one incredible benefit that keeps them around year to year, which is safety. They're a very safe place to leave children when you're, for example, cooking dinner or trying to open the door for the mail delivery person. You want to make sure that you have somewhere, perhaps temporary, but a safe space for children, not to get into too much trouble, but to spend time sort of working quietly on their own or with one other playmate. So I'm going to contrast that with a playground. So this might be a little bit easier, a little closer to home. What kind of learning do we see on a playground? I'll give you just a minute again to think and reflect. What kind of learning do we see in a playground?
Okay, we have exploratory.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun.
Sorry, say that one more time.
It's fun.
It's fun. Yeah, it is fun, right? I mean, there's a lot of exploration. You'll notice in this particular playground example on the right, it's typically outdoors, or at least in a wide enough space that children can run around and jump over each other and, you know, whatever it is they need to do, climb on the structures. In a playground versus a playpen, we often see, for example, a lot of social play. Children are able to interact with a lot more people, a lot more peers, and you know, negotiate things like turn taking and hurt feelings. There are certainly opportunities for risks on the playground. Skinned knees, bruised elbows, like I already mentioned, hurt feelings. All of these things sort of come into play in a playground, and not as much in a playpen, or at least not in as open and free-form a way. So the last question I'll ask you about both of these spaces is, where is the adult on a, actually let's start with a playground. Where is the adult on a playground? Where do we see the adults? Are they running up and down the steps with the kids?
So we have one chat part here. They say by the playground, so off to the side.
By the playground, yeah. Often you'll even see like benches, right, for adults to sort of sit. You do see parents or adults, you know, wandering around holding hands, especially with young ones, you know, introducing them to the playground. But by and large, it would be a little odd to see a bunch of adults playing on a playground because that's a space that really is meant for children. And in fact, it's so meant for children that I don't know if any of you have ever seen an adult try to dictate the rules of a game that's played in the playground, similar to how you might dictate the tools that are available in a playpen. But it doesn't really go very well because children are not so quick to give up their control over the activity in the play space. So I want you to keep these two metaphors in mind of a playpen and a playground, because although we're talking about physical spaces right now, at DevTech and at ECT, we really believe that digital spaces can afford the same types of learning that physical spaces can. And right now on the market, we see a lot of playpen technologies. They're safe. They offer perhaps one or two skills that children can really hone in on. I'm thinking, and you know, again, I'm not trying to argue that these are negative or that we shouldn't use any of these tools. Some of these are my personal favorites. I loved Math Blasters growing up, if people remember that video game that really was a drill and repeat math game. But you know, there wasn't a lot of freedom within the form. There wasn't the opportunity to create your own math problems. You really were just kind of memorizing a specific skill that someone else had designed for you. Whereas in a playground, we like to see children developing creativity. We want to see them as the creators of their play experience. We want to see them using their bodies and their minds and their communication skills. And we want to see them in charge of the learning process. So all of these things that we look for in a playground that you kind of instinctively know good play is happening. If you see these skills or these behaviors, we can observe these with technologies as well. It takes a little more care and a little thought in the design of the tools, but ultimately coding is one of those areas where we much more often see a playground style tool because it offers the platform of creative direction and puts that power in the hands of the child rather than in the hands of the adult or the designer of the tool. So I'm going to briefly talk about two playground technologies that are available from DevTech Lab. One is the Kibo Robotics Kit. It's a screen-free robot that allows you to code using wooden blocks that have barcodes on them. So you could construct your wooden block code and scan with your robot, and then it'll act it out just as you would programming a robot with a computer screen. And then there's the Scratch Junior programming app, which is a very similar philosophy to Kibo. It's a tablet app, or you can also use it on Chromebook. It's a free download, and I'll do a brief demonstration of it later on, so I won't get too much into it, but effectively it's a tool that lets you tell stories, make games. You could design a game for someone else to play, or you could design a greeting card for someone else to open. You can create dynamic and interactive animated collages. There's really no wrong way to play with Scratch Junior. And often what we find when children play with these tools for the first time is they say, I don't know how to play this game. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And to me, that says this is a child who has really only ever played with playpen technologies. They're looking for rules, for instructions, for the narrow line that tells them exactly how to engage with this tool. And that's not what these tools offer. They offer more holistic, more experiential, more open and free and creative experiences. So what does that result in terms of their learning? This is a screen with a lot of text on it, and I'm not going to get too deep into any of these concepts. If you're curious about this, the citation is right there at the bottom. Again, I mentioned Dr. Barris has written a number of books that inform all of our work at DevTech and at ECT. So this comes directly from one of her books. But the Positive Technological Development Framework is basically a way of thinking about learning that happens with technology. So on the left, these assets, those are things that we know from research with positive youth development, with, for decades of research in child development and learning sciences. The assets are some sort of character strengths that we know young children and children at any age, learners at any age, need to develop in order to be contributing and positive members of their communities. But assets are very difficult to measure. I don't know of any of you, if any of you have for example, an assessment to measure how caring someone is. I don't know of one, and I might question one if it existed. But so although they're notoriously difficult to measure, it's very important for children to engage in these assets as they're developing. So that brings us to this middle column, behaviors. So it's a lot harder to see what's happening inside a child's heart or in their mind. But it's a little easier to see, for example, when they're collaborating with a friend, when they're talking to someone about a project that they've just made, when they're doing something that requires some choices of conduct, maybe we could also say executive functioning, doing the right thing, making a choice that's rooted in a value or a system of belief that you're doing something for the better good of someone else or for your community. All of these behaviors are pretty easy to measure and pretty easy to observe. And actually in Marina's book, we also talk about how they're easy to foster as well by having tools and technologies like the ones I just described that offer playground style experiences. You offer opportunities for children to approach those behaviors and make choices about how they're going to engage in them. Some ways on the right that you might see a classroom trying to support these behaviors involve, for example, having an open house where you invite everyone that the child knows from their life, families, babysitters, neighborhood, anyone else in their classroom, to come and learn about the projects that they're doing with their technology. And that directly funnels into community building. You can clearly see how that would relate to children's understanding of their sense of community and identity. Another way that you might want to foster one of these behaviors is a design process, an engineering design journal. So maybe you have children write out or verbalize to you while you write out the steps of their process as they were working on this project that they spent many weeks or many hours contributing to. You can see how that would directly funnel into their content creation as they're developing a new project to bring into the world. And it helps them reflect on all of the steps that were involved in that content creation to see that iteration and failure is an important piece of all of that behavior. So I cover all of this not to give you a crash course in developmental theory, but to really emphasize those 6 key behaviors in the middle column: communication, collaboration, community building, content creation, creativity, and choices of conduct. These 6 behaviors are what we are looking for when we see children playing on a playground, and they're also what we're looking for when we see children engaging with technology in a rich and a developmentally appropriate way. Now, there's another somewhat newer framework that's coming out now that we're actually engaging in a lot of research at DevTech, and we're seeing as a highly successful way to introduce coding or computer programming. And that's to think of it not as, again, not as a math problem, not as a puzzle to solve or a map to follow. Those are all elements of computer programming. But you learn to code so that you can express yourself and communicate and creatively bring new projects into the world. All of these are features of languages. So we actually conceive of coding as a way to express yourself, to communicate, to problem solve, to collaborate with others. Everything that happens in a literacy classroom or a language developing classroom also happens with technology. So to take this extension a little further, you might have heard me say the design process. If you're unfamiliar with that, you can look on the right here at this rainbow infinity insignia here. We actually used to have that as a circle, but realized that it made people think too much that there's a rigid step-by-step process. You must ask a question before you develop your plan, and you must test and improve it after you build your plan. And in fact, what we see both with young children and professional engineers and coders is that practice is kind of all over the map, and we see people bouncing around back and forth between steps. That's part of the real creative process. So we wanted to honor that by making this sort of an infinity symbol, meaning it never stops and there's no wrong or right way to start. So the design process, which consists of asking a question, imagining a solution, and going through steps to sort of bring your plan into the real world and test and improve upon it by soliciting feedback, that aligns very nicely with many other processes in the world, like the writing process, for example, where you need to imagine what you're going to write before you draft it and have several iterations of your revised draft before you're ready to publish. You could also, and I have in the past likened the design process to the scientific method, to the rehearsal process as you're getting ready for a performance, for practicing to become better at a sport. But the writing process really lends itself nicely to this coding and engineering design process, because both of them emphasize so heavily the importance of revision and iteration and coming to terms with what some call failure, what others see as opportunities, and really embracing those for what they are as chances to learn how to improve and how to create the best next step, next version of your project that you can. So on this page on the bottom, you'll see, just to really drive this home, on the left, a step-by-step example of how someone might explain how a child might explain the steps of a daily task that they do every day, like brushing their teeth, that has a clear beginning to end sequence. Sequence is a very important learning goal for any coding activity. And if you change the order of the sequence, you're not going to come out with the same kind of brushing your teeth experience. So similarly, on the right, we actually see some coding blocks from Scratch Junior. They are also positioned in a sequence. And just like the sort of the story of brushing your teeth, if you alter the instructions in any way, the order of the instructions, it will result in an altered final project. And that's a very important learning goal. Sequencing is foundational to numeracy, to literacy, to executive functioning. Sequencing is an incredibly important skill that all of our research at DevTech has really honed in on. So if you're at all interested in coding and there's only one major takeaway I could send you off with, it's that this is an important skill, not just for computer science, but for all of the other ways that sequencing is foundational to a holistic developmental view of a child. So I forgot to do this earlier because we got started a little late, but I want to just double check with Kevin. Are there any questions in the audience, any ideas or thoughts that we want to get out before we head into the next section of our little talk here?
So far, I haven't seen anything pop up on the chat for questions, so I'm still watching that. But to our people who've come in, and some of you who've come in just a little later, any questions or comments that you have, please include the chat. And then when we have these breaking spots, I will share them with Dr. Strawhacker.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. Oh, I forgot there was one more slide about this. So just to, this is another example of how you might see computer science and literacy lining up. We're really driving this home again because language and literacy is it's easy for anyone to see how it touches every aspect of a child's life. And you might not think of that way with coding and computer science, but when you actually envision the lived space in the world that children inhabit, it's a lot of tools and technologies they see every day, they engage with every day, that no one teaches them how they work or how they were made or what they do. And all of that can contribute to a lot of confusion and sort of magic realism in their minds of what's going on in this magical black box that's called a computer. So by introducing the idea that coding is actually a process that humans engage in to instruct or give instructions for machines or computers to carry out, you automatically place them in the position of someone who's not just sort of saturated in a world they don't understand, but maybe a critical reader of the digital text that's around them, or an author of their own digital creation. So we already compared the design process to the writing process. There are several other foundational skills-based connections. Representation in terms of letter sound correspondence or letter meaning correspondence. You can imagine how that directly relates to, for example, a symbol on a coding language that represents an action they can complete with their bodies or see a robot complete. There are several other examples. I won't touch on all of them, but one that I think is very important is debugging. So the idea, I think I've already touched on this, but that iteration and revising is very, very important in editing and thinking about the perspective of your reader when you're writing something in text or when you're narrating something to a teacher. It's also very important when you're developing a code. If the game that you make doesn't actually give you points when you want it to, you're going to have a very confused user on your hand, and that's going to inspire children to want to keep working on their project for personally meaningful reasons. And it also offers a little bit of perspective taking. That's something that's developing in this age range too, is knowing why your friend might be sad even though you aren't feeling that emotion. So all of these things come into play when we're thinking of computer science and coding as an expressive platform rather than simply as a drill and repeat practice session. So now I wanted to just take a quick moment and share with you one example of that playground technologies that I've been talking about, Scratch Junior. While I'm going to transition and stop sharing my screen, I will switch to a different location to share, while maybe Kevin can find out if anyone else is familiar with Scratch Junior. You can put your hand up in the chat or just write something in the chat if you're familiar. We have a lot of Scratch Junior experts in the audience today, or perhaps some Scratch Junior newbies.
Yeah, so if you're familiar with Scratch Junior, maybe just put something in the chat, what you've done with it in the past. If it's something that's new to you for a concept, just say, new or have only heard of it. So if you could just share that, I'll just pass that on to Dr. Strawhacker shortly.
Excellent. So you can also let him know if you can't see my screen. You should be seeing the Scratch Junior background. That's actually my iPad that I'm projecting with QuickTime. And I'm just opening a new project.
So far we have people, someone who's new to it, other people who have heard of it but haven't used it before. For myself, I have used it in the past, but with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders.
Excellent. So this might be everyone's first or second time seeing this app. If you're more familiar with it, but you've used it with different kids, that's totally great. We actually think that one of the best ways to introduce anyone to a new subject, whatever age they are, is to start with a tool that was designed for young children, because as we know, young children learn by doing, they learn by observing, they learn by trying it out. And although we like to pretend that that's not how everyone else learns, it actually is. So I encourage you to check this out if you're also just feeling a little self-conscious about your own ability to engage in this world of coding. It's a great place to start. But right now, I'll just show you briefly. So what you're seeing here is the project screen. You could almost imagine as your artist's palette, your canvas, a blank canvas for you to work with. Every screen starts with, can you see my mouse cursor circling the cat?
Yes, it's working.
Great. So you can see the cat here. This is how every project starts. But for today's project, I really want to tell a story of, and actually, Kevin, can you remind me, Harry the Dirty Dog? Is that the name of it?
Yep, Harry the Dirty Dog.
Harry the Dirty Dog. So we're going to call our project Harry the Dirty Dog. And the first problem that I noticed with my Scratch Junior project is that I start with a cat and I need a dog. So what I'm going to do is go over here to the character palette. This is actually, anytime you see a plus sign in Scratch Junior, that usually means you can add something. So I'm going to click this plus sign. And that brings me to a character library. There are a number of characters that have already been pre-populated in this library. At the top are stored some edited characters here that you can see I've made. When you use this tool with young children, you'll see that the edited characters is actually going to be the bulk of your library, and they're going to be wildly colored, like beautiful scribbles and dragons and all kinds of creative characters. So for this one, I'm going to look for a dog character. I really want to make sure that Harry the dog looks like a dog. And because this dog is pretty clean and looks like he just got a bath, I'm going to edit him a little bit and go to this paintbrush icon here. So I tapped once on the dog to make sure that it's highlighted with this orange square. And once it's highlighted, I know that if I go up here, I could press the check mark to mean that's the one that I want. I could press the X to mean switch which character I'm highlighting. But I'm going to press this paintbrush here. And this takes me to the artist palette or the paint room, whatever you want to call it. So my dog is very clean, and I need him to look a little more like a dirty dog. So I'm going to go over here to this squiggle line. That means sort of free draw. And I'm going to select the color of dirt, which I guess would be this sort of dark brown here. And I'm just going to use my finger along this canvas area and create some little clouds of dirt for him. He just got back from the dog park, and he's really messy. So he's dirty. Maybe I'll add a little more depth to my dirt here. And I'm actually going to go over here and make wider lines by selecting the bottom widest line and get some really grimy dirt here. Harry really needs a bath. So now he's looking a little bit like that Peanuts character. I don't remember his name. So this is looking dirty enough to me. So I'm going to go ahead and press the check mark up here. That means I'm done editing my character. And now I have my very dirty Harry. He's over here on the left, and I want to get rid of my cat. So I'm going to press and hold with my finger very gently on the cat, and you'll see that it starts to dance and a little X pops up. You can do that really anywhere on the screen. I could actually have done it over here. I can press and hold the cat on this canvas, and it'll do the same thing. And when I tap that X, it'll just disappear. So now I'm using my finger and dragging Harry around. I want to make sure I give him a background so he's not in just a white canvas. And dirty dogs, in my experience, like the outdoors. So I'm gonna bring him to this nice park area, and I can double tap that for the orange and then tap the check mark to make sure that we're outside. And in my story, Harry is going to see this stream over here, and he's going to run towards it and jump in. So first things first, I want to make sure that when I press this green flag, that's when Harry moves. But he's not doing anything now. So I go over to my yellow trigger blocks. This is all the blocks that initiate or start an action. And I'm going to drag down the one that looks like that green flag. So now when I press the green flag, this code should start. And let's just double check that by pressing the green flag now. You see he's blinking. Okay, so we don't have any instructions here. Let's add something to his green flag. I'm going to make him walk to the right. You can actually tap on a block without moving it to see what it'll do in English. That's more for teachers because we know that children can't read that well at this point. And this number down here tells me how many steps. So what is a step in Scratch Junior? Well, if I go up to this grid feature up here, you can actually see that there's sort of a coordinate plane. And it's a little difficult to tell, but can you see that that's sort of a blue square there? That means that that's the center of my character. So it's not on a point because we know that young children haven't experienced Cartesian coordinate planes yet, but they do know about quizzing rods and squares. So he's at square 6, 5, and I want him to move. Where do I want him to move? Maybe all the way over here is where the river is. So I'm gonna start him back at 5 and minus, what was that, 16 or 17? So I'll have him move about, let's say 11 steps. So I pressed that over here with the calculator. And that just pops up whenever I press the number at the base of one of these blocks. And then I want him to jump. So I'm gonna drag my jump and have him jump maybe 3 squares up. And jump again, why not? And this time he'll jump 2 squares up. So now I have a little code for my dog. I'm going to turn off this grid feature because that's in the way. I just want to see him jump in the water. And when I press this green flag, he's running, he's jumping. Great. So that is exactly what I wanted my dirty dog to do. If I wanted to continue this story, I might, for example, go over here to the page palette and click this plus sign. Now I have, as you see, an entirely new page. And again, I'm back here with my cat. That's a little frustrating. So I want to get rid of my cat. Oops. So we remember by pressing and holding, I get the dancing X. Sometimes it takes a little practice even for adults to move. You'll notice that when you get rid of the cat, all of the coding instructions go away. And that's because you don't have anything to code anymore. So that makes sense. So when I go back to my first page, I can actually click and drag from my character palette all the way over to my second page. And now he's on my second page waiting for me to code him and continue telling my story. And he brought all his code along with him. Wasn't that sweet? So that was a very quick and dirty introduction to Scratch Junior. I know we're at like just a few more minutes. So does anyone have any questions about this tool before I head back over to some tips and tricks that you might be interested to learn about resources for introducing coding in this age group?
I did put the links to both Scratch Junior and to Scratch on the chat area. Scratch I've used with the 4th and 5th grade. It is free to download and use with your class. And I know with the 4th and 5th graders, when I've used it, I've had kids get addicted to it, and they are working complicated patterns with their object and creating games and everything else. So
yeah,
for that.
Thank you for making that plug. I should let everyone know that this was created with the same team that developed Scratch, but Scratch Junior obviously involved a lot more of us child developmentalists. So we highly recommend that everyone check out Scratch. It's very different, and I could talk, that's a whole other discussion of how they're different and what different learning they foster. But where they align is that they're both playground technologies where they offer the children a lot of freedom and a lot of creativity. I see that we have a number of questions in the, oh, okay, great. So that was a very brief introduction to Scratch Junior. I don't have a lot of time to introduce. I do have some videos here about Kibo, but I just wanted to draw your attention. You know, there are some very specific blocks that align to sequencing and storytelling. So if you wanted to dive into that, I'm actually not going to touch too much on them because we're a little low on time. But if you visit scratchjunior.org, there are a number of resources, including free curricula, and the DevTech website also has free curricula for you to just see how, for example, you might introduce patterns in music with Scratch Junior, or you might introduce sequencing and storytelling, or game design, or ethics and laws and rules. All of these concepts can be explored, and that's the beauty of a playground technology, is that it's open to whatever direction you and your classroom are hoping to go conceptually.
And we do have a question that came in about, can you add voice to the story?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. So actually, I wonder if I still have my Scratch Junior screen up. I'm gonna stop sharing and go back to Scratch Junior really quickly. So if you go to the green blocks, that's here in the palette, you'll see that there's one pre-recorded sound. I don't know if you can hear it. Let's see. I don't know if you could hear there's pop sound. If I don't want a block, I can just drag it up here and release and it'll go away. There's also this little cutout area. If I press that, it takes me to a recording studio. And now if I press this record button, la 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 la, it's tested. It recorded my program. I can play it and check it. I don't know if that's gonna work right now while it's plugged into my computer. And when I'm ready, I press that check mark. Sorry if that was a little fast. And now I have a new block that I can go ahead and add to my code. Those are sort of saved locally within characters. So if I made a new character, this cat is not going to have the same recording because that's in the dog's voice. And I would need to record new sounds for the cat.
And my guess is that if you want the same character to say different things at different points, you'd have to make a copy of that character with the other voice that you're going to use then. Is that correct?
So if you wanted one character to say something different?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can actually record up to 5 sounds. So I can go ahead and record another sound. Well, it didn't record anything that time. And I could introduce that into my new code. I could also just remove that sound. But yeah, and I think it might also not transfer across pages. It might be specific to a page. But you can always delete these also by, again, tapping, holding, waiting for the dancing X if you run out of blocks and you want to add more.
Okay.
So again, I'm going to stop sharing. And I know we're right at time and I don't want to keep anyone. So if you have to leave, of course, go on your merry way. But I know that there's all of these resources that I'm showing you here are available on scratchjunior.org and within the app. There are more resources for Kibo that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but I encourage you to check out the handout that I just gave, or that I gave to Kevin, and I think he may have already shared in the chat. It has resources about all the research I talked about, that online program that I direct, or that I associate direct that you can learn about, and all of these free curricular resources and videos and conversations with other educators. You can find all of it on the DevTech website or on the ECT website. And you can also follow us on Twitter and keep the conversation going.
Okay, I just posted that link to the chat area. And I think we'll have to try some way to make sure that for the recorded parts that they can get that link from you as well.
That sounds great, yeah. I wonder if I can just share some of these. All the same links are in my slide deck as in that handout. So just make sure that you click that link. I can project it so that you know what it'll look like when you see it. Let's just see if I can do that really quickly. So this little PDF actually has clickable links. If you hover over it, you can visit that website. And I put resources for research, resources for educators like all of you might be interested in, resources in case families are curious about the work that we do, and ways to contact and get in touch with us if you'd like to keep the conversation going about coding in K-2. Okay, so I think that's everything that I had prepared to share with you all. I believe that there are new sessions going on, so I don't want to keep anyone, but I personally am available if anyone wants to stay on and ask questions or continue the conversation.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
we want to remind people that there is a survey that they are asking that you fill out. So please remember to fill that out. We don't have access to it, so I'm sure that they probably talked to it in the other session. So wherever that link is at, if you could make sure you fill the survey out, that would be wonderful. Thank you again for attending, and thank you, Dr. Strawhacker, for helping and present this.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Really fun. Good luck with school. Okay. So Kevin, I don't know if you need anything more from me. Do I need to complete a survey as well, or?
No, don't have anything, and I think if they're going to have anything for survey, they'll probably send it to us in an email later.
And is there any way that I could, like, do we have, for example, the email contacts of everyone who showed up or registered so that we can send out this link to them?
We don't, but that might be something that we talk to Bonnie about. And then I think the people who are viewing this on the recording may not be able to see the chat with that link. So we'll want to make sure that somehow that gets shared to them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kevin. This was really fun.
That might be something that we put into just an email. I can email Bonnie when we get off of this.
Yeah, if you don't mind, that I would really appreciate that. That would be great.
And I'll put that link in there where we put that, and I'll include you on that email.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. And I see that Lucinda is still on. Does she have a quick question for you? Yeah. She does. I'll just have her. Do you want? I can unmute her if she likes.
Yeah.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay.
Good? All right.
I'm good.
We get it. Sometimes you just want an empty room to hang out in.
No, I'm good. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
No, we just, in case you had a question, we didn't want to be monopolizing the time. So.
All right. Thank you again so much, Kevin.
Amanda, I'm just going to share one quick thing with you.
Yeah.
When you're talking about coding and the language, when I went through my college the first time and became a computer scientist, I got my computer science degree from the University of North Dakota. And up there, what they had is if you were a computer science major, you were exempted from the foreign language requirement because they considered computer languages to be a foreign language.
Yeah, I can't believe that how long that history has gone, and we're still back around at trying to convince people that it's similar to a language. But it's so true. You know, it's interesting you bring that up because there are a number of states now considering that for high school and earlier as well. And I know that there's, you know, a heated debate going on. Of course, we're not arguing that it's the same as a natural language, but yeah, there are a lot of similarities and overlap in terms of how you use it. That's really cool. And we didn't even get a chance to talk about how you worked for the team that made Oregon Trail.
That's okay. I did the programming for about 17 years, and then went back to school, became a teacher, and switched into teaching middle school, elementary, and now doing the tech integration. So
awesome. So how did you, you know, if you have any other constructive feedback as someone who was in that field for so long, do you feel like it did justice to what you hope to teach about coding in early childhood?
Yeah, I've done it before with the 4th and 5th grade. So for me, I was curious to see how you scale or adjust it down for the attention span. And
yeah, Scratch is, I have to admit, so I taught with Scratch for a long time, and I love the platform, but it is such a steep learning curve. And especially for the young ones that I work with, I mean, obviously for under 3rd grade, it's not recommended. No. But even with 4th and 5th grade and 6th grade, when I was working with 6th and 7th graders, we had to devote almost half of a 6-week unit just to learning what all the blocks do.
Yeah, we didn't go into in that depth, but we went into enough that they can make a simple thing. So we took maybe about a week, and then everyone had the access to it. So there was a lot of students, probably about a third, who would go home, talk their folks into downloading it on the computer at home, create things, and then they'd bring them back in to show me what they had made.
Oh, that's so great. That's wonderful. Yeah. And that's the beauty of it, right? That's why you get into it.
So it wasn't something we did it not forcing everyone, but it was enough that you had a large group of kids who became interested with that, and then
and kids
they
would
were then
otherwise have approached it.
Yep, and they were learning it on their own, which, you know, it's now at that point no one's forcing them to do it, so they're
that's
doing
an indicator of learning on its own.
Yeah, it's a different world when they're doing it themselves.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, listen, if you're ever curious about using Scratch Junior, you know, feel free to email me. I was part of the launch team and the research team behind it. So I'm always happy to put you in touch, you know, even if your kids wanted to talk to someone who went to a Scratch day or whatever. But since you talk about doing it at home, I encourage you to check out scratchjunior.org too, because you can share projects back and forth. Kids can work on that from home in school. which we found is going to be helpful for distance learning this coming fall.
Yeah. My goal this fall with the K2 is just getting the teachers up to speed on Seesaw.
Yeah, I think that's a big enough goal.
I'm getting plenty of feedback from the K2 teachers right now. So,
wow. Well, you're doing the good work. So the rest of us are just in awe of all the teachers out there on the ground floor. So thank you so much for taking time this summer to work on this with me.
Oh, thank you. This was fun to sit on this one today. I enjoyed it.